Thank you for joining us for the August 6th City of Santa Fe Planning Commission meeting. I'm Jack Hyatt, the chairman of the commission, and I'll start first of all with Melissa. Would you please call the roll of the commission?
Yes, Chair Hyatt,
Here.
Vice Chair Hogan,
Here.
Commissioner Clow,
Here.
Commissioner Faulkner,
Here.
Commissioner Garcia,
Lee.
Commissioner Garcia,
Sorry, I'm on mute again. I'm here.
okay, thank you. Commissioner
my dogs.
Gutierrez,
Here.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Here.
Commissioner Satenia.
Here.
Mr. Chair, a quorum is present.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll lead it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we go further, Mr. Burke, would you please give your 2-minute instruction to anybody that's participating and help them through this process?
Yes, thank you, Chair and Commissioners and members of the audience. If you'd like to participate in tonight's meeting, you can do so by attending virtually. When the public comment is opened by the chair, we will ask you to use the raise hand function if you'd like to speak, and then we'll swear you in, and then we would actually give you about 2 minutes to speak. If you're calling in, you can press *9, and that will also do the raise hand function, and we'll call you out and you'll be able to speak once you're sworn in. If you're attending and watching on YouTube, you can always go to the city's website and click on the link for tonight's meeting to attend virtually, and you can also participate by raising your hand in that. And if we have any technical difficulties when we're unmuting you, we'll try to come back to you if we can't hear you, and so that you can be heard. And besides that, that's all we got.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Next item is the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from staff?
Mr. Chair, there's no changes.
Are there any changes to the agenda from the commissioners? I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve, Faulkner.
Commissioner Hogan seconds.
Roll call, please, Melissa.
Yes, Commissioner Clow,
Yes.
Commissioner Faulkner,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Gutierrez,
Yes.
Commissioner Hogan,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Satenia.
No. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion has been approved.
Thank you. Moving on to the approval of minutes. There are no findings and conclusions, so we'll deal with the minutes of June 18 and July 2nd. Are there any changes to the minutes of those two meetings by staff?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, staff does not have any changes.
Are there any changes from commissioners? Okay, seeing none, please, I'll entertain a motion
Commissioner Faulkner to approve.
for both
Commissioner Hogan
sets of minutes.
seconds.
All right.
For
and
both.
All right, Commissioner Hogan, both sets? Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Melissa?
Yes. Commissioner Clow,
Yes.
Commissioner Faulkner,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Gutierrez,
Yes.
Commissioner Hogan,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Satenia.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion has been approved.
Thank you. Next, we'll move to old business, and we're on the ordinance amending section 14-11.4 of the Land Development Code. Director Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I believe in your packets, you have a cover memo describing the ordinance and its changes. I also believe earlier this afternoon, Assistant Attorney Paez distributed a new version, or I shouldn't say a new version, but a correctly formatted version of the civil penalties proposed ordinance amendments that included the proper strike throughs and underlining of new text for your convenience and to ease our walkthrough of the proposal this evening. Am I correct? Did everyone receive that earlier today?
Well, I did. I assume everybody else did too. Anybody that didn't get it, any commissioners that didn't receive it? All right, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll read through the executive summary included in your memo. And then I would like to hand it over to Assistant City Attorney Paez to run us through some of the significant substantive changes. And then we will open it up for questions. I do not believe we received any written public comments prior to this meeting. And as you may remember, we decided not to allow public comment at tonight's meeting when we postponed this item from the previous agenda in, I believe it was either late June or early July. So with that, I've actually, Ms. Paez, is there something you'd like to add?
No, I was just going to say that it was June 18th.
June
And the
18th.
motion to postpone did specify that the commission would receive written comments timely received, but we probably would not be opening this matter back up for additional public hearing at this meeting. You're on top of it.
Thank you, Ms. Paez. It's a change. So amendments to section 14-11.4 SFCC 1987 include provisions for adopting civil penalties, a civil fine schedule, and a civil citation procedure for land use code enforcement actions. The amended ordinance would also clarify the circumstances under which the land use director may revoke permits, including short-term rental permits, and would permit the land use director to order a 1-year waiting period for application for a short-term rental permit by a person who has violated the short-term rental ordinance. As you may know, section 14-3.3 amendments to text of chapter 14 outlines the process for amending text of the land use code. To make a positive recommendation to the governing body, the planning commission must find that the text amendment meets the 6 criteria set forth in 14-3.3b. So these that I am about to read are the criteria by which we will evaluate the proposed changes to the amendment and should be the basis of this evening's discussion. The criteria are compliance with the law, consistency with the general plan, consistency with other policies adopted by the governing body, consistency with the purpose and intent of chapter 14 and the section being amended, consideration of how the amendment relates to other provisions of the Santa Fe City Code and the avoidance of unintended consequences, and finally, consistency with any approved neighborhood conservation overlays. So with that, I will open it up to questions from the commission.
Before you start, Ms. Paez, did you want to add anything before we ask commissioners for their input or questions?
Thank you, Chair Hyatt, commissioners. I really don't, except to just note that this is an amendment that would apply to land use code violations more generally. So although it was originally proposed as a companion bill to the short-term rental legislation, which is being sort of still considered and redrafted, this would apply more globally. So just to state that. And if anyone wanted me to run through the draft to kind of point out where the additions are, I'm happy to do that. Or if everyone's received the draft that shows all of the underlining and strike through, then we can proceed.
Well, let me check with the commissioners. Commissioners, do any of you want to hear Ms. Paez be more specific, or would you like to have questions right off the bat here? So let me go back to panelists and see, I don't see any hands raised. Commissioner Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it makes sense to just go to specific questions, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. Go ahead.
In general, I really support having some teeth in the enforcement portion of the code. And so overall, I'm really supportive of it. I was a little concerned about anything that's ambiguous and wanting to make sure that we were making a clear record of intent. And I was a little concerned by the line on page 3, line 16, when we talk about, let's see if I can pull that up. Anyway, it has to do, it gives the director authority for enforcement over, I think the way it's stated is, falsified information on an application. And I wanted to just understand a little bit more about how that works, what, how that would typically be applied in your eyes when you're seeing that. Line 16. Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner Hogan. So what happens now is either through oversight or sometimes intentionally, we will receive an application that does not include either a full representation of the property that is being applied for, or that possibly there may be HOA or COA type restrictions on a short-term rental at a location, and those aren't given to us as part of our review of the application. And so it's only, oftentimes some of this information comes to our attention after the permit's been issued. And so those are the types of situations where we would like to be able to retroactively revoke a permit that has been issued so that we can be in accordance either with local HOA constraints, or if we find out something after the fact that there's, say, maybe not adequate off-street parking, or there's not the level of, the interior of the unit has been misrepresented in some way as to number of bedrooms or some other consideration, that once we find out about that, that we do have the ability to determine that a property may not be suited for an STR permit. We have the ability to revoke it.
If I might, Mr. Chair, with the follow-up. So the way I read it, it actually goes beyond just the short-term rentals though, and applies to any building permit application. And, in my own practice, I go in and I go, I think this project's going to cost $40,000. And if it comes out, it turns out to be $80,000. I don't want to be like, subject to fines or something like that. It's not real clear, and it could be used sort of punitively, it seems. I guess that's what I'm trying to.
Just so, thank you, Commissioner Hogan. To game out that situation, if there was an issue with, say, evaluation on a construction permit, and it came to our attention that you had entered $10 on your application, but we've seen a contract that you have with your contractor, it's actually for $1,000. And there's now a difference in fees that were charged versus fees that should have been charged. I think in that scenario, we don't have a formal policy on this, but just thinking it through, I would ask you as the applicant to pay the correct amount of fees that should be associated with that permit. If you were not willing to pay what should have been charged, had you provided us with the accurate information at the time of application, then I may be in a position to impose a fine on you as a way for the city to recoup some of those lost revenues. So I think that that's how that would work. I don't think that we are in a position to punitively act towards any of our applicants. I think it's all about having some tools at our disposal to get compliance to the greatest degree possible.
Right. Yeah, because I can understand, if you go in and you say, I want to build a bedroom onto my house, and you build on 4, that could subject you to an increase in the fines that you properly defined it, and I totally get that. So thank you for.
Yeah, if that was the situation, you'd have bigger issues than just the
Yeah.
fees you owe the city.
Yep, thank you.
Commissioner Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask a question about the fiscal impact report. The fiscal impact report, I think, was done when this was part of, back in June, when this was part of all the short-term rental ordinance. I'm wondering if, given the changes that have been made since then, if there are any changes to that potential fiscal impact of these ordinance changes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lawrence. Actually, this fiscal impact statement is specific to this ordinance. And if you look at the revenue narrative at the bottom of the sheet, it walks through some of the thinking that went into producing the numbers presented in the fiscal impact statement. So we were looking at potential number of short-term rental units operating in the city, either without the proper permits or registrations, charging the average fine amount, which as you may have noticed in the ordinance, it's an escalating penalty schedule. First offense is $150, second offense is $250, final offense is $500. So we took an average of around $250, applied that to the fines across the board, and then figured that we would get year to year better compliance. Therefore, we would be issuing fewer fees. And in our third year of having the system on board, we would be, seeing maybe 50 to 75 fines issued a year. And that would be the recurring amount that we would see moving forward. These are rough estimations. These are not necessarily numbers we're depending on to fund our budget or anything. It's a estimate of what we may see.
Right. I guess I was just wondering, does this include other types of penalties for other types of violations for permits, development permits, things like that?
That's an excellent question. Actually, in putting this together, I did not contemplate assessing fines beyond really the short-term rental program. This was really, as Commissioner Hogan had pointed out, this does have broader reaching implications to the land use code in general. However, for the purpose of this FIR, it was just sort of contemplated through the lens of the short-term rental program.
So do you have a sense the impact of other types of permits? Is that a minimal amount or is it a more significant potential amount?
I mean, I think that it would make sense to assume that if there were more opportunities to apply the civil penalties provision, therefore there may be an opportunity to issue more fines, more citations. So if that was the case, the revenue projection would go up. There's other scenarios in the land use code where civil penalties might apply beyond just, say, issues around construction permits and other applications like that. We do have requirements for ongoing performance during construction, whether it be around issues of noise, dust mitigation, other things like that. I haven't had a conversation yet with the assistant city attorney about how we would maybe apply this ordinance to those situations, but that would be something that we want to explore at some point.
Okay, thank you. That helps. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Clow.
I just had a comment on Mark's question. Perhaps it would be better to say a material misrepresentation, so that it's, it has to be significant enough to be relevant.
Director Isaacson, does that seem reasonable, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Clow, it seems reasonable to me, but I would defer a recommendation to the assistant city attorney.
Ms. Paez?
Thank you, Chair Hyatt, Commissioner Clow. I think it's a good suggestion. What the commission's doing tonight is making a recommendation to the governing body, which we'll be hearing this on Wednesday, if all things go as we hope. And so certainly you can include a proposed amendment to any provision. And I think material misrepresentation is a good way to say it. It could be an intentional misrepresentation of a fact known to the applicant, or, I mean, you could certainly clarify it. I think material misrepresentation would be a good proposed change for sure.
All right, then we'll take that into consideration when we get to the motion. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't at the meeting where this was discussed the first time, so I didn't really, I looked a little bit at the minutes and so on and so forth, but in terms of the $500 is the maximum, and I guess that's directed to Director Isaacson. And would there ever be any kind of a situation where there might be further penalties imposed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Garcia. So it is my understanding that the $500 penalty is the maximum financial penalty that we can impose by state statute. That's not to say that we couldn't impose the $500 penalty multiple times if there's multiple violations. But that would be the, I believe, and I think this would be a great thing for Ms. Paez to weigh in on. And I do believe that we still reserve the right to handle these situations through a criminal process as well, if we felt that the civil process was not remedying the situation and getting us the type of compliance.
Director Isaacson, your audio is kind of fades out a little bit from time to time. Just speak up a little. I think we probably caught it, but it's been a little.
Thank you.
Wavery. And I'm happy to speak to that as well. It is actually a limitation in the New Mexico Constitution, and the city's jurisdiction to impose civil penalties is limited to the maximum amount that we're allowed to impose as a criminal penalty, which is $500, the maximum for a petty misdemeanor. But that, as Director Isaacson noted, that if we can prove multiple violations, that would give rise to could give rise to separate $500 penalties as long as they're distinct violations.
Does that answer your question, Commissioner Garcia?
It does, thank you. And that's just would be one of my concerns, is that I'm not a very big fan of imposing additional fees to people, and yet we do have to have a way of keeping people accountable. Doing multiple instances can also raise an issue at some point, but I think it's pretty clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Cloud, did I follow up? I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as a follow-up to that, you know, one of the challenges with developing this schedule of fines is we've heard stories and seen evidence of folks in other cities who, because the fines were so low, they figured that they would still operate and just pay the fine and still make a profit. And so we had to come up with a schedule that actually would be a deterrent for folks operating without the proper permits and registration. So that's how, you know, why we topped it out at 500, is that is far more than the average STR is renting for on a nightly basis. And therefore we felt like this would be a reasonable deterrent to keep people from operating and sort of disregarding any penalties that the city would assess.
Thank you, Director. Commissioner Clow, I apologize. Did I cut you off? Do you have more questions?
No, that's all.
All right.
Thank you.
Commissioner Faulkner.
Could you, Eli, could you go over the appeal process just briefly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Faulkner. If you don't mind, I would prefer to defer that question to Assistant City Attorney Paez, if that's okay.
Myself unmuted here, and sorry, I'm like skimming fast. I apologize. I hope I'm not making anyone seasick. So the appeal process would be through a hearing officer. It would be an administrative hearing. And these provisions set forth in subparagraph 4 are loosely based on our procedure for like a parking ticket violation, because that's an area where the city does have a real settled structure for how we would handle. However, we do have some other areas where we have these kind of administrative appeal hearings. I think in our medicinal marijuana, it's our criminal marijuana resolution actually has kind of a similar process. We do sort of a similar process for liquor license appeals. Those are heard by a hearing officer and there's an appeal process, but this is loosely based on the parking ticket appeals. And so you would need to request a hearing within 15 days of receiving the civil fine, receiving notice of the fine, and the hearing officer would be appointed by the city manager. I was speaking with our city attorney today about who we would recruit and who's paying for it and things like that. And that's unfortunately a little bit above my pay grade. We've been going through a lot of the budget process and stuff, but I would anticipate that they would be lawyers. We would probably advertise in the Bar Bulletin, and we might consider using a pool of hearing officers for potentially more than one type of appeal hearing, or maybe they would be specific to land use if we can find folks that have that kind of specialized expertise. But the way that this would work is that you would have to actually deposit the fine pending the hearing. And then the hearing officer would schedule a hearing within 30 days. And if the hearing officer upholds the civil citation, the city would keep that money and it would become, the fine would be paid. And otherwise it would be returned to the person who has filed the appeal. And if a person wants to further challenge that, then they can appeal it to district court. I think this is the right rule, 174. There's two different rules for appealing to the district court. This one applies when there's a statutory right to appeal. And I think we're treating this as a final action of the zoning authority. So I'm pretty sure this is the right rule. I was wondering about that today. There's a rule for when there's a statute that allows the appeal and a rule for when it's not. You have a right to appeal either way and it's almost the same procedure. I want to review that one more time. I'm going to make a note before governing body hears this on Wednesday. So if you wanted to appeal it to the district court, you could. And if you win, you would certainly get your money back. And if not, the revenue collected for these types of fines would be used for further enforcement within the land use department, is how this is proposed.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Burke, do you see any other hands raised?
I do not actually. Yes, I do. Commissioner Clow has her hand raised.
I don't think she wants it raised. Do you want it raised, Janet? There we go. All right. Commissioners, if no further hands are raised, I assume we have exhausted our questions to staff. If that's the case, then the chair would entertain a motion. This is a recommendation in favor or against these, and there was an amendment in case it's a favorable.
I move that we recommend the approval of the ordinance amending section 14-11.4, and that we make one change on page 3 in section C, D, and add material at the beginning of the sentence before representation,
Thank you.
misrepresentations.
Is there a second?
I'll second that. Commissioner
All right.
Hogan.
All right. Without further discussion, Melissa, would you poll the commission, please?
Yes, and Chair, who seconded that?
I'm sorry? Yes,
Who seconded the motion?
Commissioner Hogan.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Clow,
Yes.
Commissioner Faulkner,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Gutierrez,
Yes.
Commissioner Hogan,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Satania.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion has been approved.
Thank you, Melissa. And based on the fine advice I get from Assistant City Attorney Paez, I'm going to start voting, so I vote yes as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Hyatt, I just wanted to remind commissioners so that we're able to see it if we could try to use our raise hand function for motions and then say that your commissioner name, and then it makes it easier for us to keep records of who made the motion first and who seconded.
All right, thank you, Mr. Burke. Thank you, Director Isaacson. We'll move on to new business. This is case 2020-2267 and 2020-2268. 719, 721, 723, 723 and a half Don Diego, the Castillo Compound Zoning Ordinance Amendment and the Castillo Compound Development Plan. Mr. Burke, is there any reason why we shouldn't take both these at the same time?
Mr. Chair, commissioners, no, you can hear both of them at the same time.
All right, Mr. Gamora.
All right. Can everyone see everything all right?
Yes, so far so good.
Great. So I've got two cases for you tonight. The first one is a zoning amendment. And as you said, that was case 2020-2267. And the second one is a development plan amendment, which is 2020-2268. Both of those are at 719, 721, 723, and 723 and a half Don Diego. It's also nicknamed the Castillo Compound, and so we'll be referring to it as that. The case has a lot of messy history and somewhat confusing details, but at the core, I think, is actually a relatively simple request here. First, I'll touch on the development plan request and some of the background, and then I'll get more into the details of the zoning ordinance and the development plan amendment request. I think that that's going to be the clearest way to do it. So here is the existing compound. It's technically 3 properties. On the west or the left here is Don Diego Ave and Don Diego Court. And on the right or the east is the Don Figueroa Alley. Both of those are public right-of-ways. The applicant wants to make a couple changes to their property that, compared with some of the typical types of development plans that you'll see, are relatively small. If we look at this starting out on 2 of the single-family homes, the applicant is proposing to make additions totaling around 1,250 square feet. On the back of the property, there used to be a carport, and the applicant is proposing to rebuild a carport in that area around 400 square feet. The total square footage change or the lot coverage change from both of these requests is around 30%, or around 1,650 square feet total. 30% of the lot coverage addition. Also in the back is an old accessory garage. The garage is now a storage building. The applicant is proposing to change that back into a garage. And then the applicant's also proposing around 6-foot high walls and fences on the back and the front of the property. That's pretty much the bulk of the development request. If these properties were typical, if they didn't have special zoning rules or didn't have an existing development plan, these kinds of changes could go straight for building permit. But these properties are definitely not typical. So starting off with some background, here is the development plan approved in 1999. It pretty much reflects how the compound currently exists. Rather than have conditions of approval on the development plan, however, the development plan is just recognizing the zoning ordinance conditions. So here is the zoning ordinance. So the zoning ordinance establishes a special C1 PUD district, and it's specific to the Castillo compound, and it places 15 conditions of approval on the property. Typical of a lot of zoning ordinances, there's a regulation of overall use. So in this instance, uses are restricted, commercial uses are restricted to offices, which the applicant has had in the past. But there's also a lot of other conditions on the property. Some of the conditions are ones that we typically expect as conditions or notes on a development plan rather than a zoning ordinance. So this includes things like maintenance requirements on buildings, a requirement to have plantings on property lines, keeping and maintaining landscaping, meeting landscaping requirements, complying with development plan improvements. Again, a lot of this is development-related conditions that we usually see as notes or conditions of a development plan. There's also some confusion around some of the zoning ordinance conditions. And so if we look up here at conditions 2 through 5, a great example is that it requires that the footprint be preserved. There's been a question about whether preserving a footprint would allow additions to that footprint. With a building, you could add additions to a building and there's still the building. But if a footprint is defined as a shape and size, then changing that shape is now changing that footprint. And so there's questions about what was meant by preservation of the footprint. Further, quite a few conditions of the zoning ordinance actually contradict or conflict with what the Planning Commission allowed in the 1999 development plan. And so examples of that, in the zoning ordinance, it said that you can't build new walls or fences, or that you have to build walls and fences along the Don Cabero Alley and limit visibility and automobile access. The 1999 development plan allowed automobile access and did not require those walls and fences. It also required that an emergency automobile gate was built on the Don Cabero Alley. There wasn't a gate built on Don Cabero Alley. It also required that the applicant tear down the existing garage and carport. They tore down the carport, they maintained the garage. So again, there's been a lot of confusion and kind of some messy history around why some of these things happened in the past. But I suggest that the best place for the commission is to really stay focused on what is reasonable now. I think that would be the best place to focus for the commission's decision tonight. The end result of staff's review of the zoning ordinance was that the applicant should try to clear it up, and they have. They have come forward with a zoning ordinance that significantly changes and amends what was originally requested. Changes in verbiage, not necessarily in use and form. It is if you look at the staff report, there's 3 conditions in a table there that are proposed to be changed. And so you could see the top kind of box of this is looking at the strike through and added language. The bottom box would be the end result. And so these would be the conditions that the applicant is actually proposing to maintain and keep. Then here's all the conditions that the applicant is proposing to delete. Most of these, some of these would be deleted outright, and some of them would transfer to the development plan. Again, staff agrees with the applicant and has kind of suggested some of these to the applicant as ways to make sure that development conditions are placed on the development plan and would be reviewed by the Planning Commission rather than as conditions of the zoning ordinance. We think that that's a much better place for where they should go. To provide some context, here's kind of the resulting proposal. On the left, you see the staff recommended conditions of the development plan. On the right, we see the applicant recommended conditions and notes of the development plan. If you wanted to look at that, you could see that a lot of the conditions in the zoning ordinance have been transferred into conditions and notes that would be placed on the development plan. Sticking with the zoning ordinance though, I think it would make the most sense to discuss the zoning ordinance first. The proposed zoning ordinance is clarifying applicable conditions of approval. It's adding 2 additional permissible commercial uses. And so here it's galleries with restaurant kind of fast service. I'll let the applicant explain some of the reasons behind that. And then it transfers a lot of those development related conditions to the development plan instead of maintaining those on the zoning ordinance. Chapter 14 provides specific criteria which must be met in order to rezone a property, but doesn't actually provide specific criteria for evaluating a request to amend the conditions of the rezoning. And so what that means is that the commission should look at how the proposed zoning ordinance would affect the public interest, and make sure that the public interest would be better maintained and served through the amended rather than the original zoning. Because staff finds that the proposed zoning ordinance is clarifying conditions, moves development related conditions to the development plan, and is reducing and removing a lot of the redundant zoning conditions that are on the property, staff is supporting the ordinance amendment and is recommending that the commission recommend approval to the governing body. Besides that, I could take any questions if we want to talk about that so far. Otherwise, I could just start to move quickly into the development plan.
I think you should go to the development plan now, and
Yeah.
but we have a lot to do on the amendment, that's for sure. But go ahead,
Yeah.
please.
So, so here's the proposed development plan. Again, it's of around 1,250 square feet of residential additions to the existing structures, the conversion of the storage building back into a garage, the construction of a 400 square foot 2-car carport where there used to be a carport in the 90s, and then modifications to walls and fences. And in this, staff reviewed the development plan for the pertinent development plan approval criteria, and also is recommending that the commission approve the development plan as well. And with that, I can stand for any questions.
All right, first of all, Carlos, can you identify who's going to be speaking for the applicant, please?
Yes, so I believe that Celia Castillo,
right.
the applicant, will be speaking.
All right.
And then it sounds like there's other people who might be able to answer questions,
All right.
but I don't think there's any other presentations.
I don't see Celia as a panelist. Is she? Noah, is she on by telephone or some other method?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Celia is a panelist, and she's probably, if Carlos stops sharing his screen, you could probably see her. And then she is unmuted, so she's able to speak if you'd like to have her speak right now.
All right, so Carlos, we'll get questions to you in a minute. And Celia, if you're there, you have the floor. Would you be sworn, please?
Okay. Ms. Castillo, please raise your right hand. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your full name and address for the record.
My name is Celia Foy Castillo, and I live at 719 Don Diego. And the first
Thank
thing,
you.
okay. The first thing I like to do is introduce the people that are with me. I have my husband Al, who is also an applicant. And then we have Subi Bowden and Julia Wyrick, who are the architects on this project. And then also on the webinar is our daughter Felisa, our son-in-law Clark, and our granddaughter Eleanor, at least for a little while. So before I start my sharing though, I'd like to tell you all how much we appreciate having us on the agenda tonight. We know that you have many items to consider, and we've been watching some of your meetings to get ready for tonight, and we recognize the time, the study, and the thoughtfulness that you put into the issues. Thank you for all your work. And now on to our case. I have a little slide presentation. Carlos has done such a good job. I may slip through it pretty fast though. Here we go. And okay. All right, we've done the introductions. I'm going to do a little bit about the location of the property, a short history of the ownership, background of the project, and then the amendments to the plan and the ordinance. Here is the aerial view, so you can see where the property is. There's Entrada Park, Cerrillos Road, Don Diego. The turquoise top is 719. Then right to the south of it is 721 with the garage, and then 723. None of this is in a historic district. Then here's an aerial shot. 721 is here to the north, so you can see to the south that the property is predominantly residential in the Don Diego Neighborhood Association. But here's the property down here in the corner, and you can see to the north, we have commercial, the business capital district. The rail yard is right here to the left. So we are in a buffer of transition property. Okay, here's the front. Carlos already showed you that. 721, I mean, that's 719, 721, 723, the little garden area between 721 and 723. And this is the mural of the locomotive that's behind Sage that we get to see out of our parking lot in 719. So the back of the Sage Inn. Then the back on Don Cubero, that's the back of 719. That's the back of 721 with the garage. And then here's the back of 723 and a half. And you can also see part of the garage as well as the back of the unit. Okay, we've owned this property since 1976. That's when we purchased 721. And then we purchased the two adjoining properties. We lived in 721 for several years, but then we moved to Silver City in 1986. The property was residential and office rentals. Then we returned to Santa Fe in the early 2000s. We remodeled 719 where we live right now. We've lived here since 2004. Our older daughter, Salita, she moved into 723 in 2005, and she's lived there ever since. 721 was a law office until late 2019, when unfortunately the tenant attorney passed away. 723 and a half was offices, and then when the tenants left, we've started using it as a personal office because even though we're retired, we still have paperwork. Now, our future plans, our younger daughter, Felisa, her husband, Clark, and Eleanor would like to move to Santa Fe. Felisa is a teacher in the Los Lunas School Districts. Her husband also works for the school district, and they feel that they can get a job here in Santa Fe without too much of a problem. So we would like to adapt the compound to accommodate the three households. We would live at 719. Felisa and family would live at 721, Salita at 723, and then 723 and a half would be for family and friends and still remain a personal office. So what we did is we contacted Subi and Julia Ryrick, and they began to work on the project. We made a presentation to the city in January of 2020. The city looked at the ordinance and the final development plan. And as you heard from Carlos, that's when we discovered a number of problems. So after much discussion with the city, we decided to go forward. And this is why we're here today. Carlos has pretty well gone over the site development plan. We want to add a living room and a deck on our property, add enough room for a new bathroom and some square footage at the back of 721, the garage for Clark's 1967 vintage Mustang, a carport, and then we would like for a variety of reasons to have the property fenced with this or walled with a 6-foot wall. Here are some pictures of the elevations. These are the ideas that we have as far as developing the property is concerned. That's the front and then the side of 719. Here we have the rear yard of 721 where we'd add the bathroom and the additional square footage. Then there'd be a bay window over on the south. And this is, you can see the line is straight where we add the bathroom. And then in the back, we add the wall, the carport, the garage, and then another wall. So in the front, this is what the front looks like now and what we like to do. Well, before I get to what we'd like to do, this vine that's in front of 721 has been there since we bought the property in 76 and we plan to keep it. So the wall would look like this. It's stucco in front of 723, vine in front of 721, stucco for part of 719 with a rolling gate that'll close at night. And then we go around the tree so we can save the tree. The reason that we would like a 6-foot wall is for privacy, safety, noise reduction, and aesthetics. And when we get into that, as far as privacy is concerned, right now, people walk through the property. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, somebody came in the back gate and just walked across the front, I think to go to Whole Foods. And we would like to be able to have the wall so that doesn't happen. As far as safety is concerned, a couple of months ago, we had some chairs outside in the front. When we got up in the morning, one of the chairs was missing. But what happened is somebody had come in at night, moved the chair, seemed like they were enjoying the evening in the chair because they had moved it to another part of the yard, and then they left. So we just want to secure the property so that doesn't happen. We also have cars that sometimes are making the wrong turns and come into the compound, which is not so bad during the day, but we would like to not have that happen at night. The walls would also provide noise reduction and then aesthetics. I understand that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, but I do think that the wall does add to the property and to the neighborhood. Our property is commercial property with mixed use, and it's a transition or buffer property. And what we're trying to do is good for the neighborhood as well as good for us. Now, as far as walls are concerned, I have a study here of the walls between Cerrillos Road and Cordova to show that there are many homes with walls, starting with the Sage Inn, who has a wooden fence. And I'll give you the summary, then I'm going to go through it real fast. There are more than 20 walls at 6 feet or over down Don Diego, and there are 4 of them in our block. So here we go. Here's Al in front of the Sage with more than a 6-foot fence there. Then these are in our neighborhood. And then we go down the street and you can see that there are, I can go slower if you'd like. But the whole idea is to show that there are a number of 6-foot walls and fences along this area. Plus, when we go to the neighboring areas, this is Gomez Road with 6-foot walls.
Can we slow down a little bit?
Sure, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, then here is 6-foot walls along Sena. And then there's stucco and walk walls around Don Cubero Avenue. And then this is in the back along Don Cubero Alley. So 6-foot walls and fences are found throughout the Don Diego neighborhood and in the area of our property. So Carlos has explained the ordinance very well, and we want to amend the first 3 conditions and then delete conditions 4 to 15, but transfer most of them to the development plan as conditions or notes. So condition 1 is to allow 2 additional commercial uses for the future. Galleries, and then restaurant, the official name is restaurants, fast service takeout, no drive-through, drive up. And that's to allow a gelato type or an ice cream shop. We chose galleries because Clark's family has run galleries first in Atlanta and then in Silver City. We also have a number of the members of our family that are artists. Now, I'm not one of them, but we do have a number that are artists. So a gallery is a use that we would actually do sometime in the future. And the key is that this is for a future use. And then as far as the gelato type ice cream shop, Clark is a baker and Felisa makes all kinds of wonderful ice creams. So at some point, this would be a realistic possibility. And that's why we choose those 2 uses. They are uses in C1, and they're something that we can do in the future. The second condition is to clarify that the renovations, additions, and construction are allowed. When we agreed to the conditions back in 1999, it never occurred to us that we would not be able to have additions. So what this does is it clarifies what the intent was back when we agreed to those conditions. The third condition is an amendment that have us comply with applicable regulations, not just the zoning requirements for the residential uses. So what this does is in the future, when we do a gallery or a gelato shop, we have to make sure that we follow the regulations for commercial development, the regulations for parking, the regulations for ADA, and that's the safeguard for a future development. What we don't have to do is come back to the Planning Commission. And I will say it's a very interesting journey, and not to have to do it again, to just allow 2 more commercial uses would be wonderful. Then Carlos already showed you a slide like this with the new language versus the old language. So I'll just go through that one. And then the deletions are to eliminate the difference between the conditions in the ordinance and the actual conditions on the development plan. And Carlos pointed those out. What happened is that after the council went ahead and approved the conditions in the ordinance, the neighborhood association continued to work with the city. And Laura Wilson, who was at that point the president of the association, wrote a letter to Greg Smith, and I have a copy of the letter here, where she agreed that we could have 2 residential parking spaces on Don Cubero Alley, and then retain and repair the garage as a storage building. So the final development plan showed this language, because this was our agreement, but did not go back to the council to change the ordinance. And that's why we have that conflict. Then one of the deletions would allow us to have a second story. Right now, second stories are not allowed. And again, that's something for the future. What would happen is by allowing second stories now, we don't have to go back to the council to ask for second stories, but there's a safeguard. And the safeguard is this: if we want to build a second story, we have to go back through the development plan process, and it would go through the planning commission. So there's safeguards for both of the things that we're requesting as far as changes are concerned. So with that, I have a similar slideshow about second stories, but I'm going to spare you. I'll spare you on that. So what it comes down to
No,
now
I'd like to see it.
Oh, you'd like to see it? Okay.
Yes, I'd like to see it.
Okay, it's going to take me a minute. I need to stop share, find it, and then get back in.
While you're doing that, you've answered my most important question already, which is, who's the man in the background that kept appearing in all of your pictures? And I realized now it's Al. And I hope you paid him a lot of money.
Okay. Okay, here we go. Second story buildings in the area of the Castillo compound. There are about 16 along Don Diego between Cerrillos and Cordova. So, and this is a map of showing that road. So right, 2 houses down, there's an apartment complex and it's got 2 stories. Then on the corner, there is same block, another building with 2 stories. Across the way on the same block, that home has 2 stories in the back. You can see behind the tree. Then down the street, 2 stories, 2 stories. On the other side of the street, there's a house along Pueblo Drive that has 2 stories. And then there's 834 Don Diego that has 2 stories, 849, 850, and then there's 4 of them along the 1000 block of Don Diego. And then these are more commercial 2 stories. They're along the corner of Don Diego and Camino de los Montes. So there are about 16 second story buildings, and our compound is right across the street from the Sage Inn, which is 2 story, and caddy corner from the Rail Yard Park, which also has 2 story apartments in it. So I can stop the share now.
All right. Ms. Castillo, did you have anybody else in your group that needed to testify at this point in time on your behalf?
It may be that Subi Bowden, our architect, will testify.
We've heard of Subi before. Hello, Ms. Bowden. Subi, do you have anything that you want to say? And if so, you're going to have to be sworn.
I'd like to be sworn in case any questions arise that I might be able to answer.
All right, Melissa, will you swear Subi in, please?
Yes. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And when you speak, please state your full name and address for the record.
Thank you.
No, your name. Yeah.
Right now, my
No,
name.
you can do it now. Go ahead.
Okay. My given name is Susan. I'm called Subi Bowden. Address 333 Montezuma Avenue, Santa Fe 87501.
And do you have anything you want to add now, Subi, or would you rather wait for questions?
I'd rather wait for questions.
All right, then
Thank
Ms.
you.
Castillo, that would conclude your presentation at this point in time, unless there's anything else you want.
Yes, that concludes our presentation.
All right, how much did you pay Al? No, I'm just kidding. All right, so now, ladies and gentlemen, this is the public hearing portion of the meeting. And if there's anybody that would like to testify in this matter, it's your opportunity now to do so. If you would please identify yourself by the raised hand. And I see Ms. Benenato's hand raised. Stephanie, if you would be sworn, please.
Stephanie, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. You'll be asked to be sworn in, and then your time will begin after that. Thanks.
Ms. Benenato, do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your full name and address for the record.
Stephanie Benenato, P.O. Box 1601, Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I do
Wait.
live in,
Go ahead.
say, what, Jack?
Well, I was just going to say, I want to remind everybody that you have previously submitted written testimony. And I just wanted to remind you that we generally limit this to 2 minutes. So that's just all I wanted to say. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Okay, but you have 2 cases, so can I have a few more minutes if I need them? And I hope you have looked at my written comments. I think what I want to say particularly is that this is a specially zoned compound, and that much of what is being looked at is just to delete things rather than say, why were these conditions imposed to begin with? What kinds of changes have occurred since that time that would justify doing away with the conditions, not just looking at what's reasonable today, because those conditions were imposed for specific reasons. And I'm particularly concerned about the architectural ones, the low walls, the second stories. For example, the addition at 719 totally changes the architectural, totally changes the architectural style. There's an addition on, I think it's 723, let me just pull that up. That also really changes the look of that building. 721, that is 721. And again, I don't oppose anything that they want to do facing Don Cubero or having carports back there or garages, but I'm really concerned about the, again, architectural styles, the low walls and the second stories. And I think there needs to be more than residential lots further down or lots or, streets that are a couple of blocks away have these walls. If you look at the properties to the north, they are very similar in look to this property. That is, they have very low walls. And this is, they want to increase commercial use on this property eventually. And again, I'm really opposed to approving future commercial uses. And the one I'm concerned about, because it says businesses and professional offices. Businesses seems like a giant category because it's not business offices, it's businesses. And it's not so to me as a lawyer, I'm reading it, it's businesses. And I think that needs to be stricken actually. And then again, as a preservationist too, I think you should have some discussion about what preserve footprint means. And
Stephanie, let me stop you just for a minute, please. Ms. Paez?
I just wanted to note that that was 2 minutes, Chair Hyatt. I wasn't sure if you really wanted me to call that or not, but at your discretion, you can.
She raises an interesting point, and I hadn't thought of it before. So first of all, Ms. Paez, what's your recommendation? 2 minutes or 4 minutes?
In the chair's discretion, I think it's fine. The main reason to limit the amount of time for comment is when we have a high volume of speakers and we don't have a lot of attendees tonight. So
I see what others. So without objection from the commission, we'll grant you another 2 minutes. Stephanie, go ahead, please.
sorry for the interruption.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. So again, I think I've stated a lot, but I think you need to really discuss what preserved footprints means. I've given you some suggestions there. I think the addition should have a square footage limitation on it. I still haven't really heard how much each building is being added to, like what's the existing square footage and then what's the total new square footage on each building. I don't see that anywhere. And I think additions should be distinctive, but not overwhelm the building. And particularly, again, if you're looking at the H-board ordinance as a guide, the things that are publicly visible and or unique to the house, like that 721 facade that I'm opposed to changing with the windows and doors, then you preserve those, but perhaps you let changes in on other things, because I think no change at all is unrealistic. But again, second stories, these are newer buildings, newer additions on residential zoning, as well as the 6-foot wall. And if you look north, it's compatible with that. And the entrance and exit there is very limited. It's very narrow. Then you have to come across a double yellow line to get in there, depending on the way you're going. It's a very odd little entry there with at least 3 other commercial businesses all there. So I really ask that you have a little more discussion about getting rid of all the conditions that were imposed for this very special zone. It had to be sunsetted in. These were the conditions. Why should you just wholesaledly do away with them? And one more thing, if you are going to adopt number 3, instead of just something about, it's the part that says with applicable regulations, I think comply with applicable regulations, I would have you say comply with applicable commercial regulations and no exceptions. So 5 years from now, they don't come back and ask for more changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hope Reed, you're up, and if you heard the prior testimony, you know that if you need 4 minutes, you can have 4 minutes. Would you be sworn, please?
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
You might still be muted, Hope. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Thank you. Please state your full name and address for the record.
Okay. Hope Reed, 321 West Cordova Road, Santa Fe. I live straight down Don Diego from this project. And I had concerns when I first saw all the changes to this project, but I spoke to Subi at length and she explained it to me, and a lot of them were already in the process to be eliminated. So it wasn't just for this project, it seemed to me. And I think the project, I support the project. I think it's going to be a nice improvement for the area. And I think it's appropriate for that area as well, because it is a little commercial area. And I think that it will be a nice addition to the neighborhood. And I don't have any further comments on that, but just that I favor the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Hope. Appreciate it. Noah, do you see any more panelists or attendees that are wishing to talk?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, out of the 3 attendees, 2 have already spoken, and I think the third one is the applicant for the next case, so I don't see any more.
All right. At this point in time, we'll close the public hearing and open the comments to commissioners for staff.
What about, no, just,
I'm sorry.
are there, am I still, yeah. Do they have questions for Subi or me?
Oh, we'll see just a minute. We're going to check Ms. Castillo and come back. And there'll be an opportunity to discuss, since Ms. Beninato was the one who spoke against, you can obviously comment on some of those, but let me see what the commissioners have to say first, please. All right, commissioners, let's see, who's up? I don't see any hands raised. All right, at this point, then let me go back to Ms. Castillo. And would you like to respond, ma'am?
I think that Subi would like to respond to the architectural
All right,
questions.
Subi?
Thank you very much, commissioners, for working with us this evening. In case you don't know me, I'm an architect and planner in the city of Santa Fe. I worked on the rail yard project for over 30 years, so I know this district very well. And I also was the planner working with the Castillos in the 1980s. So I've watched this property throughout that process. It seems that the primary discussions that Ms. Beninato is concerned about are footprint and architectural styling. I want to assure you that in all conditions, all three buildings, the footprint is being preserved. We are not taking down the existing buildings. We are requesting additions. And there's nothing in the 1984 approvals that says we cannot do additions. It simply said we needed to preserve footprints. In that process, we're also maintaining architectural styles. I heard questions about the styling of what we're doing. I'm going to hold up, in case you can see it, images of the 723 building. It's a Pueblo building with territorial wood porches attached. When we go to the middle building, which is 723, 723 is a miniature of the wrap and wrap Santa Fe style of Gross Kelly warehouse. We are continuing to preserve this little mini replica of that idea that occurred after the wrap and wrap buildings. And then the more complex structure is this building, which is 719. And 719, the best we can put it is sort of like a farmhouse structure that's had a pitched roof on it. Again, we are not taking down any of this building. This building is staying intact. But in front of the building, we are adding a porch and a living room, and we are above it putting a roof deck, so that when you see the new addition, you also will see the existing structure remaining in place. In the back, it's the sort of peculiar, again, kind of farmhouse-like structure that's been added on and added on and added on over the years. 2 out of the 3 buildings are Pueblo style. The porch that we're adding adjacent to the new living room is a Pueblo style porch. And then the farmhouse structure remains intact behind it. So again, we're preserving footprint and we're preserving styling on all 3 buildings. If there are any additional questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Mr. Hogan, you have your hand raised. Is it pertinent to what Subi was just talking about?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
You're recognized, sir.
Thanks. Subi, I wondered if you could show the elevations again of the structures on Don Diego with the walls shown in there.
Sure. Let me share my screen. Okay. All right. Oops, that's the wrong one. Wait.
And Celia, this is Noah. I just wanted you to, I had a question just also, was the wall restriction put in place before that park was there?
Yes.
Okay.
The Entrada, well, let me see, hold on. The Entrada Park, maybe not. The Entrada Park, they started working, Subi would know.
The rail yard park was under public discussions at the time of the 1984 development plan for the Castillo's property, but it had not actually been implemented until many years later. And the Entrada Park was also later in the late 80s, maybe early 90s. Hope might be able to give us the exact date, but it was the neighborhood's effort to kind of transition from the rail yard park across the street into the neighborhood park.
Thank you.
Okay, so here is, all right, here we go.
Celia, I also have those drawings too, if that helps.
Excuse me?
I also have those drawings up, the elevations, if that helps.
Okay, this is what you were talking about, right, Commissioner Hogan? This-
Not so much the other walls and fences in the neighborhood, but the walls and fences you were proposing on your structure.
Oh, okay, that elevation, sure. This one.
I don't see it.
Oh, it's, you can't see that one?
No, ma'am, you're still on
Okay.
the title page. Walls
Okay,
and fences.
let me, all right, just a second. That happens sometimes. Let me. Did it come up now?
Not for me.
Okay. Let me
Delia,
try.
it might be because you're sharing the Google Docs or the Google presentation, the Google Slides window.
Okay.
And if you go to share screen and then change that, you might be able to
Okay, let me stop
change it to a different
sharing.
window.
Okay. And then go up to the share screen. All right, and then let's see if this comes up for you all. Does that come up now?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right.
And there's Al too.
Yes.
And the height of that vine is the height of the existing that he's standing next to.
Well, it's a little bit less, but not much, maybe 6 inches.
Okay, and is the vine on wall or is that on fence?
It's on a chain link fence.
Okay, so you're proposing to keep that and then
Yes,
fill with 6-foot stucco wall and a gate.
yes.
Okay. And it looks like you could still see majority of the structure in I liked the comparison to the Gross Kelly, and it's kind of fun seeing some of those features up, sticking up above the wall.
Yes, you can still see the architectural design of 721.
Okay, that was all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Carlos, this is for you. Would you go back to your slide on the proposed amendment for the ordinance? And you had 3 areas that you wanted us to specifically address that you were unclear about. Do you recall that slide?
Are you talking about this here?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So let's take these one at a time. Number 1 is the commercial uses to be limited. Applicant would like the ability to. All right. So we've heard discussion about that. And again, Carlos, your recommendation is to approve.
That's correct. And again, just to be clear, commissioners, C1, C4 uses typically allow many different types of commercial uses. This is still maintaining the restrictions on those. It is only allowing 2 additional commercial uses from that entire list of often permitted uses. And I also want to clarify that adding permitted uses does not guarantee the applicants the ability that they'll actually be able to put those in. We do have notes that would be in the development plan talking about how they do have to, comply with existing zoning and building requirements when they're built, which means that additional landscaping, parking, heights, setbacks, lot coverage, et cetera, would have to be met when those uses go in.
So is it fair to say that the applicant is self-restricting in terms of the available businesses in C1 zoning?
The original proposal self-restricted. This is still self-restriction, but the applicant is asking for a little less restrictions than what are normally applied to C1 districts.
All right. Let's deal with number 2, requiring the architectural styles of the existing buildings to be preserved. And we're now speaking about the footprint issue. Is it your query to us now, Carlos, that you want to know whether preservation of the footprint means that you can't have a vertical addition and preserve the footprint? Is that the issue?
No, I think as proposed here, it entirely removes the footprint conversation. It requires that the architectural styles of existing buildings be preserved and that new additions, renovations, and construction would have to match the architectural styles on the site. But it would no longer talk about footprints and whether footprints can be added to, cannot be added to, how to define footprints, et cetera, et cetera. And so I thought that the proposed language would make it a little more clear how to apply what staff was pretty much going to agree to originally, was pretty much going to be our interpretation, but provides a lot of clarity around how to interpret that.
Are you aware of anything in chapter 14 that would prevent the additions and renovations that are proposed?
No, Commissioner, Chair and Commissioners. The additions that the applicant requested are in line with surrounding residential and commercial properties. Again, if you look at surrounding residential and commercial properties and zoning, 2 stories are typically allowed. We still have setbacks and stepbacks, but the development plan conditions are in line with chapter 14.
Finally, number 3, are you aware of anything in chapter 14 that would prevent the applicant's request about those future commercial uses?
Chair and Commissioners, nothing in chapter 14 would outright deny the ability to put in those uses. Again, the applicant would have to comply with parking, with traffic concerns, with building concerns, with zoning concerns. All applicable regulations would have to be complied with at the time of building permit, or at the time that the applicant is coming back to the Planning Commission for changes to the development plan.
Okay, Commissioners, does anybody have questions on those 3 particular issues regarding the zoning conditions? And Carlos, would you take your screen down so I can see the participants again, please? Okay. Commissioner Satania.
Mr. Moore, if you can actually put those 3 zoning conditions back up, if you don't mind, please.
Excuse me, I didn't hear that.
He asked.
It was
Carlos
directed towards
to put
staff.
those back.
Sorry, Jack. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, that's all right.
I appreciate the great detail that staff has gone to actually kind of put this case together. I think there's, as it was described, there's a lot of moving pieces, and it's very confusing, and yet it's been a great presentation. I also appreciate the applicant's presentation. I do have some concerns, however. While it pointed to that this being a family compound, and it was very important for the applicant to name family members and the intent that they're using this property right now, one of the big red flags for me, or the concerns I have, is removing this footprint language. So my first question to staff is, when footprint is used in building, do you consider anything else? Do you consider any other interpretation other than it's a building footprint? Is that like a property footprint, or is it always in reference to a building footprint?
Commissioner Satania and other commissioners, footprint generally predominantly is referring to building footprint. And when I polled different staff, I started kind of some lengthy discussions with the historic preservation staff and the current planning staff. And there was a lot of debate around whether the term footprint would allow additions onto it. Again, thinking about footprint specifically and how we define footprint as opposed to just saying the building. And so because there was those concerns, the suggestion of staff was to get away from that language and try to create different types of clear language. If there's a proposal from the commission, I think we'd certainly, entertain and see how we can make that even more clear.
Well, I think I would agree with you that that footprint actually includes the definition of the building perimeter. And any modification in that perimeter would be modifying the footprint. So I think from my perspective that I would like to offer is that you know, you are modifying the footprint of the building when you add an addition. You're expanding the perimeter of that building. I think it's pretty clear. Now, my concern about these modifications and the attempt to make them more clear is that it seems like for the future and what's being proposed here is that should they ever want to sell their property, they're wanting to open this up for commercial use. And while I appreciate limiting the amount of commercial uses to restaurants, fast food service, takeout, galleries, business and professional, what limits them in the future from actually, you know, turning this to a whole commercial space and no longer being residential? Or since we're modifying or removing the footprint language, that there could be some loophole in the future to actually remove these buildings and actually create a gallery or a restaurant on this property.
Commissioners, I think that's a great question. The property is zoned commercial now. The fact that Celia and her family are using it as a family compound, residential is a permitted use within C1 districts, but it is a commercial property.
Sorry to interrupt, but isn't it limited to a certain type of business currently?
Correct. So
it's not,
right now,
so while it's commercial, it's not just any business. It's actually limited to a particular type of business, not restaurants, not galleries, which is the intent of changing this. Correct?
Correct. And so it's a commercial property that currently is limited to offices, which our kind of definition of offices now is business and professional offices. And so it would be expanding that to multiple types of commercial uses, a couple additional types of commercial uses. The existing requirements of Chapter 14 would limit some types of construction, would limit you know, large commercial uses that aren't able to meet fire requirements, parking requirements, etc. But you know, if it was the commission's desire, that we could always place conditions that tried to still preserve the existing buildings, or that preserved what was there right now. I think staff was, again, trying to kind of approach this holistically and think, what are the restrictions and regulations that make sense for this C1 PUD based on where it's at?
I get all that. Again, my concern is by removing the footprint language, that in the future, there's no longer a requirement for them to keep the buildings intact, which was a main, you know, a main condition as a part of this ordinance, as stated in the language. So again, the moment that you remove footprint and you ask any architect or designer, when you think of footprint, it's based on a building footprint or the perimeter, that by removing that, it actually doesn't make it more clear. It actually allows this applicant in the future to demolish these buildings, modify any building footprint to expand that for these specific commercial purposes. Is that, would you agree with that?
I think that's a great question. Requiring that the architectural styles of the existing buildings be preserved.
Well, they can still keep the style, right? I mean, but technically they could tear down the building by removing the restriction on the footprint and keep the same architectural style. They just build a new building within that style.
As written, I could see that interpretation, yes.
Okay.
It is saying that additions, renovations, and new construction, not necessarily demolitions, would have to be compatible with existing buildings. And so taking away those existing buildings does get a little unclear. If the commission, again, if the commission wanted to preserve these buildings, this is outside of historic preservation, but if the commission thought that these commercial residential buildings should be preserved. There could be language in there that tries to preserve that. Not seeing a lot of discussion and opposition from neighborhood groups. I wasn't sure as staff that we should continue maintaining requirements that these buildings are preserved indefinitely.
Commissioner
Okay.
Satania, let me
Yeah,
just ask if Ms. Castillo would like to respond. I know, and I see Noah's hand up as well, but Ms. Castillo, would you like to respond?
Okay. Yeah, you can hear me now.
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Mr. Commissioner and members of the commission, it's not our intent to demolish the buildings. And I think that your concern, Commissioner Satania, is that if we sell the property, somebody else will come in and demolish the buildings. Am I correct?
Well, yeah, and again, we're looking at what the original intent is, and while it's squirrely on some of the other items, I think that there's an original intent to maintain the building footprint of this property, and that's one of the things that we're removing. And I think that we as the commission should consider the implications down the road. While your intentions to keep your family there, should you ever sell the property, what we're opening this up to is potentially to remove those buildings for the purposes of restaurants, galleries, and other business and professional uses. So I just want to raise that point to be considered before we vote on this.
Well, that's not our intent. And if there is some language that we can put in one of the conditions to prevent that, we're not objecting to that.
All right, Ms. Castillo, we'll come back in just a second.
Okay.
First, I see 3 commissioners' hands raised. Mr. Burke, do you want to weigh in on this point, or should I go to commissioners first?
Thank you, Chair, and Commissioners Satania. I would just like to weigh in a little bit on this. I think that, this is very unique. It will probably be the first and only C1 property that I've ever seen that has conditions like this. And this is something that the neighborhood and the applicant worked on in the past. Times have changed, things have changed, families have grown, families want to live on the compound. I'd also say that the limiting factors to other commercial uses on the property are going to be primarily it's going to have to do with the parking, right? The parking is going to be the driving force of this. This is outside the historic district. We don't usually put restrictions that you keep buildings like in a C1 PUD, that they have to remain the same and their footprint has to remain the same. Although I understand the intent, and I think the intent is it's almost like a transitional district in the fact that that street is widely traveled. It's close to a lot of amenities, but I think that a lot of these conditions back from 1998, and think about what's changed in that area since 1998. A lot of things have changed. There's a Whole Foods, probably wasn't there in 1998. I think it might've been a lumber yard. And the rail yard was just being completed. I think times have changed, more traffic's in the area. I could see the need for a wall. I could understand it. That park wasn't there. Now that park is there. I do think that, when we talk about existing building footprint and preserving that, that was conducive of the time, but times have changed and it's not being used as an office anymore. It's rather being used for a house, but we want to expand upon the conditions that the family feels is valuable to them for their family and what their family may potentially in the future do with the property. But I understand the concern, and I think it's a very good one when we talk about building footprint. And we did have a long conversation about this and how we wanted to address this and bring it before the commission. So I just wanted to add that into that.
Thank you. Commissioner Hogan, Commissioner Faulkner, I see your hands, but let me hear from Director Isaacson first.
I just wanted to weigh in on the notion of footprint and say that I believe that by removing footprint, but then adding the additional language that's underlined in blue, I think does in fact clarify what's going on by being specific about what modifications to the existing building would be allowed and the conditions under which they would be allowed. So to me, I find the revised zoning condition to be much clearer and would be much easier to interpret for staff at the time of building permit application versus what is existing.
Thank you. Commissioner Hogan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as near as I can tell, this is not a landmark, none of these are landmark structures. They're not historically significant structures. They're not even historically contributing structures. And so none of us know the origin of why the footprint language was introduced, but I think it's irrelevant, and I don't understand why we would put a additional restriction on the property that none of the adjacent neighbors are subject to. And I appreciate the applicants are willing to, make a statement that says, they'll keep the structures as they are and we'll respect their intentions. But I certainly don't see any reason why we should leave the language regarding footprint. It just doesn't seem relevant to me. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Faulkner?
So the question I had was, what would trigger them having to come back to the planning commission? Like if they were to tear down their houses, the residential units, and decide then they want to build something else like a business, what does the way this amendment's coming across, does that exclude them from having to meet the normal requirements of a development as far as the planning process goes?
Carlos?
I could touch base on this a little bit, and Noah, please jump in too. So I'm still sharing my screen, so you can still see this development plan, right?
Yes.
Excuse me. Generally, any changes to the footprints, the proposed developments here, would have to come to the planning commission. So if the applicant came back forward and said, we want to add, a 200 square foot area where we want to demolish all the buildings and we want to, transform the space into something different. If they wanted to chop down all the trees and create a parking lot, all of that stuff would have to come back to the development plan because that's changing. All of that stuff would have to come back to the planning commission because that would be an amendment, significant amendment to the development plan. That would be the types of amendments that staff can't take on. Where the exact line is, I think I would leave that to Noah to determine.
Mr. Burke, do you want to weigh in?
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. Thank you, Carlos. Yeah, so I mean, the development plan is the solidifying document for how a site is developed. When we get a building permit application, if there's a development plan, we look at it and we make sure it's in compliance with the development plan. So it is the driving force for development on a site, and it also gives you the limitations within that. So if somebody wanted to demolish the house, let's say, they would probably come in for a demolition permit, and we would probably evaluate at that point if they wanted to maintain the footprint, because that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the footprint. Then we may or may not look at that and say, judging on how significant the change was, do we think this needs to go back to the commission? It may. Or do we think that this can actually just be approved because they're maintaining the footprint and they're maintaining the parking and they're maintaining the landscaping? Stuff that wouldn't come back to the commission is minor amendments, administrative amendments that don't cause any more intense use of the property. And we're pretty stringent about that. When people want to come in and alter designs that were approved by the commission, we look very hard at them and we ask for lots of details. So that would be the time that you would see it, is if it was significantly alters or changes what was approved in the past by the commission, or is adverse to any of the conditions that were approved.
So just a quick answer. Nothing we're approving today excludes this in the future from having to follow any other process that any other property owner would have to follow if they were to make significant changes to their property.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Clow?
Yeah, I have a question. Is this what property, just one deed, or is there 3 separate deeds to this property?
Ms. Castillo?
Yes, Commissioner. Yes, there are 3 separate deeds to this property.
So it's really not a compound, it's really 3 separate properties.
Yes, yes. I guess there's a special definition of a compound. And we do have 3 separate properties, but we call it the Castillo compound.
And I have a question. So why is there a need for a development plan if there's 3 separate properties? Is it because of the zoning complications?
That's correct.
Otherwise, if there wasn't the zoning complication in terms of the restrictions that were put in, weirdly put in for purposes of zoning, there would be no need to be coming before the Planning Commission.
That's correct. Again, if we thought about this as a typical property with 3 individual parcels, this is essentially 3 single-family homes, and this is an applicant asking to make relatively minor, arguably minor changes to single-family homes. But exactly as you're saying, because of the zoning conditions, because of the development plan, any of those changes have to come back before the Planning Commission. And because of the zoning complications, we're also requesting the zoning ordinance amendment.
And so now with the development plan and with the prior zoning on this property, any changes always has to come back before the Planning Commission, I would assume. Any changes to the development plan, if it's approved, or the zoning, the amendments to the zoning would have to come back before the commission.
Mr. Burt?
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners, Commissioner Clout. So it's not any change, right? If they want to have a different tree in a different place, we're not going to bring that back to the commission, right? So I think there's, and in reference to why are they in front of the commission? Because it's a planned unit development, and planned unit development requires a development plan that's approved. And the rezoning was a C1 PUD, planned unit development, and that has to be approved by the city council. So that's why we have a development plan for this property. If this was any other C1 property, they didn't have a PUD, there'd be no development plan. And if it was under 30,000 square feet of development over 3 separate parcels, we wouldn't be here today. But because of how this was zoned and how it made the concessions, that's why we're
So
here.
we don't need to be worrying about what ifs in the future, because that's controlled by the current zoning. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so what we should be doing is just considering, are we okay with the requested changes to the basically amendments to the ordinance, to the zoning?
Chair, Commissioners, that's correct.
So we should address those.
Yes.
You yield the floor.
That's all I had. I just wanted to get us back on point.
All right. First of all, before I recognize Commissioner Satania, Ms. Paez, did you want to raise a question or comment?
Thank you, Chair Hyde. I think Mr. Burke covered it. I was just going to chime in and say that because it was a planned unit development, it required the development plan, and that by removing some of these restrictions from the ordinance and moving them to the development plan, those are now things that could be approved in the future by the Planning Commission, but it wouldn't have to go through the 2 public hearing process. Things that remain attached to the zoning ordinance would in the future still have to go back to governing body. And in terms of the development plan, it's only pretty minor modifications that can be made administratively. So minor deviations can be approved by the land use director administratively, but anything significant in terms of changes to intensity, demolition, additions would have to come back here. I think he said all of that though, so.
Yes, he did, I'm sure. Commissioner Satania.
Thank you. This question is for Mr. Burke. What you guys have just described moved pretty fast, because I want to understand that, because what I heard Mr. Burke say is that what we're approving today, that potentially if they were to come back and want to knock down buildings and build a gallery, because it's within the use that we're about to vote on, because if it was a gallery use, they potentially would not have to come through the Planning Commission, nor would it require any allow for any public comment or ENN.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Commissioner Satenia. If there was that scenario, and I don't think that there's any conditions on this development plan or in the zoning ordinance that says you cannot demolish a building on this property. I actually think it just says you shall maintain the footprint. Now I would leave it to Subi to, she knows where those conditions stemmed for, and she has very, very good record. So she probably knows what the intent of that was. It was way before my time. And I would say that you probably, if it was a permitted use that the commission approved as a use and it was within the allotted square footage and there wasn't a condition of the zoning ordinance that says you couldn't demo the permit, then I think we would evaluate it against that. And if it was maintaining the same heights that were approved from the original elevations that we saw through this process, which could be part of the development plan, then we would probably approve it to be a gallery that could be remodeled or rebuilt. And Director Isaacson has his hand up if you wanted to chime in as well.
Director?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Noah, I think also important to point out in this sort of hypothetical scenario that you've laid out, Commissioner Satenia. I mean, there's the zoning analysis, right? Which is this an allowable use? Is there adequate parking? Is there adequate, access? Or is the site suitable to this proposed use on any number of Chapter 14 type requirements? But then there's also the development plan restrictions that we've talked about as well. And so if to put up, say, a gallery was required, significantly changing the intensity of development on the site, then that would require the proposal to come back to this body for further review. That would not be something that could be done either administratively or just done through the building permit application process. So I think there are some safeguards, if that's a concern of the commission, as to what the future uses may be and the future changes on the site. I think between our existing zoning ordinances and the specific development plan for these three properties, we do have some level of assurance that we won't see drastic changes to the site without approval by either this body or this body and the governing body.
Commissioner Faulkner.
So just, Eli, could you just give us, like, you said there's safeguards. To me, it feels like if they went to put a gallery is going to exceed 10,000 feet maybe, right? Or whatever the trigger is to trigger them coming back to the planning commission for review. It's not like you could demo all the buildings and put up a big office building without having to come back to the commission.
Chair Hyatt, Commissioner Faulkner, that's exactly correct. And I think the scenario that would be the interesting scenario is, what if they were able to change the use of one of these buildings into an allowable use in the C1 zoning that did not require any material alterations to the existing building? Now that would be an interesting question. And I think the future use and whether or not that future use would be allowed would be dictated by things I mentioned earlier, like available on-site parking and other considerations like that. That would govern the intensity of the use on the site more so than either the zoning regulations or the development plan regulations. However, once we get into any significant alterations to the buildings, whether they be footprints or, as we heard in the zoning conditions, architectural styles, any of those changes would then require further review either by this body or this body and the governing body, depending on which we were altering. If it was just the development plan, as Mr. Burke mentioned, it would come straight to this group for review and approval. If it's a change to any of the underlying zoning requirements, it would come first to this group for a recommendation onto the governing body for final. So
Okay,
I hope that clarifies.
I have a follow-up question. It's been suggested, I know in the public comments, it's been suggested that we consider viewing this as a C4 instead of a C1. I looked at the difference. The difference seems to be nominal between a C4 and a C1. There's only like a couple of things where they differ, I think one of them being schools, like you can't put a school on one, you can on the other. But can you go over, like, would asking for a zoning change to C4 remedy this any better?
I'm not sure if that, one, I'm not sure. Thank you, Commissioner Faulkner, for the question. I'm not sure if that is what the substantive changes of those two of changing tack to that approach would be. I also would caution of us discussing that just because it's not something that's been advertised as a consideration for this evening's hearing. So I would just sort of caution us and maybe recommend we don't explore that possible avenue this evening. And depending on what the motion is on these two cases, we could then maybe take that up at a subsequent meeting if necessary.
Thank you. Sally, was your hand raised? No? Okay. I believe we're coming to the end of the discussion. Commissioner Hogan, Commissioner Clow, I look to you for guidance in terms of motions. The first motion we're going to hear is going to be on the zoning ordinance. And it's going to be a recommendation to the governing body either to approve or deny the zoning ordinance in 2020-2267. The chair would recognize a commissioner for a motion.
Commissioner Clow,
Commissioner, go ahead.
I recommend the governing body approve the zoning ordinance amended for case number 2020-2267.
I'll second that. With conditions
Commissioner
of
Hogan.
approval.
Yes, with conditions.
Thank you. Melissa, would you please poll the commission?
Yes, Commissioner Clow,
Yes.
Commissioner Faulkner,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Gutierrez,
Yes.
Commissioner Hogan,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Satenia,
No.
Chair Hyatt.
Yes,
Mr. Chair, the motion has been approved.
thank you. Commissioners, we're now on the next motion, which is to approve or deny the development plan amendment for case 2020-2268.
Commissioner Clow, I move that we approve the development plan amendment for case number 2020-2268, subject to the conditions of approval and technical corrections recommended by staff.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Hogan seconds. Melissa?
Yes. Commissioner Clow,
Yes.
Commissioner Faulkner,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Gutierrez,
Yes.
Commissioner Hogan,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Satenia,
No.
Chair Hyatt.
Yes,
Mr. Chair, the motion has been approved.
thank you. Commissioners, now we're on the findings of fact and conclusions of law. Excuse me. First, for 2020-2267, Commissioner Clow.
Yes, I move that we approve the findings of facts and commissions of law for case number 2020-2267, which are exhibit A2.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Hogan seconds. Melissa?
Yes, Commissioner Clow,
Yes.
Commissioner Faulkner,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Gutierrez,
Yes.
Commissioner Hogan,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Satenia,
No.
Chair Hyatt.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Okay. Commissioners, finally, we're on the findings of fact, conclusions of law of 2020-2268. Commissioner Clow.
Yes, I move that we approve the findings of facts and conclusion of law for case number 2268, which are attached as Exhibit A3.
Commissioner Hogan seconds that.
Melissa?
Commissioner Clow,
Yes.
Commissioner Faulkner,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Gutierrez,
Yes.
Commissioner Hogan,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Satania,
No.
Chair Hyatt.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Well, I want to congratulate you, the applicants. I particularly want to thank Al for all his contribution here. I really appreciate seeing it. Our pleasure, sir. Thank you so very much. Subi, nice to see you. And good luck. We look forward to seeing all the beautiful things you're going to do with your property. And thank you so much for going through the process with us.
Thank you.
You bet. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're moving on to case 2020-2269, the 5750 Airport Road final subdivision approval. Commissioner Faulkner.
Yes, I have recused myself from this case in the past. I just want to reiterate that I'm not recusing myself because I feel like I will be impartial, not be impartial. I'm recusing myself to protect the integrity of the vote of the commission.
Thank you very much. And I assume you'll be opting out of the Zoom conference at this point?
Yes, and then I'd like to come back for matters from the commission and staff.
All right, I'll ask Mr. Burke to give you a phone call when we're back.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, 2020-2269, Mr. Logston.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. Again, case 2020-2269. This is 5750 Airport Road, Casa Azul final subdivision. Jenkins Gavin Inc. is the agent for BBR 5750 Airport Road LLC, the owner. They're requesting final subdivision plat approval for 3 lots tonight at 5750 Airport Road. Property zone C1, neighborhood commercial, and it's in the airport overlay district, approximately 6.24 acres. I don't have a whole lot to say on this one as a final subdivision. It's very much just making sure it conforms to what the commission has seen before. I'll just say this property is located at the southeast corner of Airport Road and South Meadows Road. Applicant is proposing a mixed-use project, as you know from previous hearing, that would include a medical office clinic, coffee shop, and a 233-unit apartment community. The Planning Commission heard this case along with the preliminary development plan and zoning ordinance amendment on March 5th, 2020, and gave approval to the subdivision dependent on gaining approval of the zoning ordinance amendment and development plan. The governing body did give approval for those, both the ordinance amendment and development plan on May 13th, 2020. So now the applicant is back here for final subdivision approval. As most of the details of this project really are handled in the development plan, this really is very much simply creating the 3 lots. The handful of conditions of approval we have are just cleanup items. One of them, the deceleration lane condition, is actually already reflected on the plat. That was just one of those issues of timing of when we turn in our staff report and so forth. I do want to mention, because I promised her I would, Miss Marnie Johnson, who is one of the neighbors on the street to the east, called me and just expressed her desire. And let me preface saying this isn't necessarily something appropriate to try to condition at final subdivision. I promised her I would mention this. This really would be more like an item to include on the development plan, which is yet to be recorded. Ms. Marnie Johnson on the street to the east did request once again, as she has a time or two, that there might be perhaps some fencing or a wall along that east side of the property. Just throwing that out there because she did contact me and said that she probably couldn't be here tonight. The proposed final subdivision meets all the development standards of Chapter 14, won't create any or increase any nonconformities. Therefore, staff recommends approval of it with the conditions of approval and technical corrections mentioned in my report. 2 motions would be required for this case. Approve the final subdivision for 2020-2269, subject to conditions of approval and technical corrections. And then also approve the findings of fact and conclusions of law provided for you as Exhibit A2 in your packet. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Logston. Ms. Jenkins.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm ready to be sworn.
Melissa, she's ready.
Okay, do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Ms. Jenkins, I'm having a
Thank you.
hard
Please
time
state-
hearing you. Can you speak up or turn your volume up or get up closer or
Well,
yell?
let me check my settings here. real
That's
quick.
better.
And
That's better.
Is that already better? I just
That's better. And if you would,
forward a little bit.
there you go. Now, if you would please give us your name and your address as if we didn't know.
My name is Jennifer Jenkins. I'm with Jenkins Gavin, 130 Grant Avenue, Suite 101. I am here on behalf of BRR Airport Road LLC and request for final subdivision plat. As Lee mentioned, the preliminary subdivision plat along with the development plan was approved by the Planning Commission on March 5th, and then subsequently the development plan was approved by the City Council. So we are just here this evening in request for final plat approval. Nothing has changed. We haven't moved any lot lines, so it is consistent with what you originally approved. We're just starting to add more levels of detail around easements and reflecting the right-of-way dedication for the right turn decel lane that Lee mentioned. I do have a presentation, but I'm not going to show it unless you ask me to. I think you're all pretty familiar with the project, but I'm happy to put up any imagery that you would like to see. And I am in agreement with the conditions of approval, and I'd be happy to stand for questions, or again, I'm happy to show any imagery that you would like to refer to.
Well, hang on 1 minute while I look at the faces of all the commissioners and see whether or not they want to hear your 2-hour presentation. I see no willing participants. So thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the opportunity for a public hearing in this matter. Is there anybody who wishes to testify in this matter, either for or against? And Mr. Burke, I see one attendee that, no, it looks like they're all, that's Geronimo.
Yes.
Is it?
I see no hands.
I
I
see
see
no
no
hands.
attendees.
I see, all right, all right.
May I just state for the record, however, that Marnie Johnson did submit timely written public comments that have been distributed to the commission and will be made a part of the record.
All right, and I'm sure Ms. Jenkins took note of the comments of Mr. Logston, making sure that we at least hear what she had to say. All right, good. We're going to close the public hearing then and open for questions from commissioners. Commissioner Satania.
I'd like to make a motion.
All right.
I move that we approve the final subdivision for case 2020-2269, subject to the conditions of approval and technical corrections recommended by staff. And I move that we approve the findings and facts of conclusions of law for case 2020-2269, Exhibit A2.
I'm waiting for a second. Mr. Hogan.
Commissioner Garcia, I'll second that.
Chairman, I still
Thank
had
you.
a question before that I would like to
That's
ask
fine.
the applicant.
I see that. First of all, the motion was seconded by Commissioner Garcia. Commissioner Hogan.
At the original hearing, and I'm delighted that this is this affordable project is before us. But there was 2 questions I had earlier on the first presentation. One was regarding some of the 1-bedroom apartments as shown do not have exterior windows. And the other one was that there was not an elevator in the building. And I was told that by the next time this was presented that there would be an answer on those. And I was just wondering what that was.
Ms. Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Hyatt, Commissioner Hogan. So I can assure you that all of the units, there might be something that's just conveyed with some line work in the floor plans. but all of the units do have exterior fenestrations. I mean, that is a code requirement. And so we do not have anything that is, strictly internal to the building. So again, I will double check the floor plan, just make sure there's nothing that's conveyed. I think it's just a proverbial kind of typo in the plan. We currently have not made a change to incorporate an elevator in the building. We also have not moved forward with construction documents yet. That the building would accommodate an elevator, but that is not a change that that the owner has elected to make at this time.
And I realize that is not in our purview to require, but to have a affordable building that is not universal or not widely accessible seems unconscionable to me. So that said, I'm done, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Jenkins, would you like to explain why you're unconscionable? I mean, can you explain why in an affordable building? I mean, I realize it's expensive. Let's move on from there. Isn't that something that's desirable in a building like this that is supposedly being advertised as affordable?
It's expensive.
Yeah, I said that already. I remember. Yeah. Okay.
And, we would think in our current, universal reality that construction costs would be going down. They are not. And this project is providing 15% affordable on-site, which is not an insignificant financial burden on the project. So an elevator is a wonderful idea. And maybe as the CDs get developed and pricing comes in, if it's something that the project can afford, then it's something we would definitely look at. I mean, any developer would prefer that for sure. I mean, absolutely, but it really comes down to the numbers and what the project can bear.
Let's see. Commissioner Satania, you had a motion. Commissioner Hogan, we've answered your question. Commissioner Garcia seconded the motion. Are there any other comments, questions? Very well. Melissa, poll the commission, please.
Yes, Commissioner Clow,
Yes.
Commissioner Faulkner. Oh, she's not here, excuse me. Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
sorry. Commissioner Gutierrez,
Yes.
Commissioner Hogan,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Satania,
Yes.
Chair Hyatt.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
All right, that covered both the final subdivision as well as the findings of fact and conclusions of law. Ms. Jenkins, the unconscionable, you're excused, ma'am. Thank you so very much.
Thank you all very much.
We'll see you on the next project, and next time Commissioner Hogan and I are not going to be so nice.
I'll be ready for you.
All right.
Great, thank you. Very much.
You bet. Mr. Burke, would you call Commissioner Faulkner, please?
He stepped away. I texted him and asked him to call her, but I'm not positive if he's doing it.
I've got her number. Hold on.
Thank you, Chair Hyatt. I think that went maybe faster than he anticipated.
Yeah, me too.
I don't think I've got her number or I'd do it.
I've got your number. Let's see. Contacts.
I have it. I can reach out to Commissioner Faulkner.
I've got it right now. Hey, okay. She's coming back. I see her down below.
I'm here.
Okay, good. All right. We're through. Now we're going to staff communications. If Noah's not here, that would be you, Director.
Thank you, Chair Hyatt, commissioners. Thanks for your time this evening. That was a very tricky case that we were looking at earlier. Just lots of, as Noah mentioned, lots of moving parts. So kudos to Carlos for putting that together in a way that was easy to follow. I thought that was a nice presentation that you put together. There's nothing really for me to report at this time. As you know, we passed the budget late last week. The land use budget overall was decreased by about 18%. For those of you who didn't follow along with the hearings, that was pretty consistent with the reductions in most departments. Similar departments like Public Works, Public Utilities all saw a decrease of a similar amount. One of the other things that came up during the budget hearings is an idea to reorganize some of the departments in the city, consolidating some existing departments into larger groupings that would then have a director of that group that would report to the city manager. The current proposal that's being discussed includes the creation of a community development. I don't think we're going to call it a department because then that impacts, departments and then the divisions within the departments and what they're called. So I think we're looking at what are some other naming conventions that we could call this new larger consolidated group. But the focus will be community development, and this group includes land use, obviously, economic development, tourism, affordable housing, parks, rec, which has been cleaved off from parks. Parks has gone to Public Works, so it's just the recreation piece of Parks and Rec. And then arts and culture. And I apologize if I've excluded anyone, but I think that captures it. And so that group will be led by the current Economic Development Director, Rich Brown. And that is what is currently being proposed. It will be discussed at public hearing on August 26th at the governing body and adopted by, I believe, ordinance at that meeting, possibly resolution, but I believe it's an ordinance. So that's sort of what the next piece of this budget approval looks like, is now taking a look at a reorganization that will allow our departments to work more closely together. I think an ongoing challenge for the city has been trying to find innovative ways to get our various departments and divisions to collaborate with one another better and make those collaborations more natural. And so I think that that's one of the overarching goals of the proposed reorganizations, not only with this community development group, but also with groups like Public Health and Safety, which combines many of our community service functions with our public safety functions, and also a effort to consolidate constituent services with the clerk's office to really create a central meeting place or a point of interaction for the public in the city. And that would be through this new.
Did I understand you correctly, Director, that there's a new department that will include the land use department, but some other person is going to be directing this?
Yeah, so I mean, the land use department will still, we're actually going to explore the opportunity to add planning back into our department's title. So I would very much, I'm pushing on making us the planning and land use department, because I think that function of what we do oftentimes get overlooked. So I want to reorient people to the very valuable role we play in planning for our city's future. So we would be the planning and land use department. And then there would be a consolidation of these other departments I mentioned: affordable housing, economic development, tourism, arts and culture, recreation, into what would be called the community development something. I don't know if we were in Great Britain, it would be called the community development ministry, but we're in the United States, so I don't know what we'll call it, but it'll be something along those lines. And the leader of that new group will be Rich Brown, our current economic development director, and he will be the direct report to the city manager.
So does the chain of command then go from you to Brown to the mayor or the city manager?
So we're working through those details right now. I mean, there will be, new formal reporting responsibilities and new informal reporting responsibilities. And I'm trying to figure out through our conversations. We had our first meeting today with the participants trying to figure out those exact questions that you are asking, Chair Hyatt. Is what is the reporting? What is the organization structure? Director Rich Brown and myself, we have a very strong working relationship and really look forward to being able to work together more closely. We're still ironing out some of the more logistical issues, challenges and opportunities this reorganization will present.
Okay, my other question to you is on short-term rentals. Even though we were successful today in passing that ordinance amendment, and I'm grateful to the commission for that, I'm still very concerned about all those unregistered folks out there. And I'm just concerned that we haven't expended the kind of energy to go get those folks and make them lawful participants in the system. Do you have any optimism about that?
I do. If you could just give me 1 second, Chair Hyatt. I received an email just the other day with some statistics from our host compliance consultants. And if you just bear with me while I pull that up, it had some encouraging information about STRs. So so we've seen since mid-March a drop of over 200 units that are being advertised through the various host platforms. So that's a reduction. Many of those units were ones that were not in our system. So I think between COVID, our working on these ordinances and the conversation in the community about these ordinances, and the first round of enforcement letters that we sent out in early June, I think we've already seen some of these non-permitted, non-registered STRs ceasing to continue to rent. So I think we've made some progress on that. Obviously, there's more work to do. We also have seen an uptick in new applications for STR permits and registrations. So I think our enforcement and our work on these ordinances has motivated folks to come in under compliance. But the effort is ongoing, as you mentioned, and we are hoping to continue our enforcement and trying to address the number of folks operating without the proper permissions.
Thank you. And go ahead.
We lost our division manager in code enforcement. Those folks are now working. They've been reassigned into enforcements and inspections and are working under Bobby Padilla. And so our bandwidth, we are dealing with an uptick in code compliance complaints about weeds and other things like that. So we're stretched a little thin in that, but it's certainly something that we intend to keep working towards. And we're hoping that the new ordinance will further advance our cause on that front.
Well, let me just beat this dead horse one more time and get Ms. Paez involved, because I was talking about this with my law partner. You may be familiar with Mr. Grazer. Yes. And he had suggested that why don't we require everybody that advertises on any of these platforms to include their license number from the land use department. And then anybody that doesn't have a license number is an automatic target. I throw that out there for your consideration.
And I think
at the very beginning. And there's no proposals to remove it. What we are going to add, I think, is a provision that allows us to contact the online host platform and require them to remove a listing if we identify through our host compliance web scraper that somebody is listing something without a license, that we actually have an ordinance that requires them to remove the listing, in addition to our ability to target them with our other code enforcement options.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Anything else, Director?
Chair, I don't know if Noah would like to add anything.
I'm sorry, Noah?
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, I stepped away. My wife's out of town and I had to take a shipment that just came in for, this is, these home office things. So anyways, I had to step away. And anyways, I just wanted to acknowledge that some of you may not have known, but Greg Smith retired. And he was with the department for, I think, somewhere near 26 years. And he was the head of code enforcement, but at one point in time, he was a planner and also a current planning division director. And so his most recent role was the role that Eli talked about. So I just wanted to let you all know that he has retired and he's enjoying his retirement as far as I can tell. So.
Well, if he calls, please give him my personal best.
Yeah, mine too.
Absolutely, and I thank you for bringing that up, Noah. I think it's great to recognize the contributions that Greg made to the land use department in the many years he served, and he recently has served in the new capacity that was, in our code compliance division. But did, the majority of his year was, or of his career, was working in land use, and spent a good amount of that time as a current planning manager. Had a very impactful career on the land use department and the future of the city.
I could regale you with stories that would take hours, but let's not. Thank you for bringing that up, Noah. And again, from all of us, please give him our best if you talk to him, and same thing with you, Director. Matters from the commission. Anybody have anything they want to bring? Commissioner Faulkner, you're back. Once again, you've got that halo look on your face, Unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted now.
Yeah.
So I just out of curiosity, the decision for the chair to vote,
Yeah.
can we walk through how that happened? Not that I mind, I'm just curious.
No, I mean, the city undertook, well, I'll let Sally weigh in, but the city law some years ago, not too long ago, changed the city charter to allow the mayor to vote. And so he can vote on all the substantive issues. And so it sort of flowed from the city council. And finally, I thought, well, I was just laying back and not participating very much because I could let you do all the heavy lifting. And I thought that's pretty chicken, what? Sally?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any limitation one way or the other. I think it's if the chair could vote or not vote. Certainly the chair can always vote to break or make a tie.
Right.
So
There's
question,
no explicit rule.
given the number of commissioners, the chair voting could cause a tie.
That's right.
That's right.
And that's always been the rule. So if it's
It loses too.
it loses.
So wait, what happens then?
If it's a tie, they lose. The vote fails.
So then we have to just argue or discuss until
It's pretty much over at that
so
point in time.
that's the end of it.
Well, unless there's a motion to reconsider, I'm not even sure if a motion to reconsider is applicable, because a motion to reconsider has to be brought by somebody on the prevailing party side. So if it's a tie vote, I'm not sure how you could bring it back up again. But Sally, do you know Roberts in that sense? I don't know.
Wouldn't the motion fail and then you would have to propose an alternative motion?
We would
Otherwise,
normally need to work until we got an action on a case. Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
All right, Jack, be careful how you vote.
Oh, God help me. Oh, Lord.
You went from laying low to being in the hot seat, buddy.
Oh.
There's always been the ability to vote to make or break a tie. So, I mean, that part, it's an unfortunate piece of having 8 of you. I think we really need to get to an odd number. And then potentially you could have a meeting where we'd have to postpone something because it is, deadlocked at an even vote. And then ideally you'd have an odd number at the next meeting and you'd be able to break the tie in that way by getting to the full commission if you were missing one and then the next meeting had the full 9.
So are we going to get the other commissioner anytime soon?
Director?
Eli, have we heard on that?
so we it's definitely. Am I unmuted? Thank you.
No, you're good.
Thank you, Chair Hyatt, Commissioner Faulkner. It's something that we're certainly looking at. It's unfortunately, it's just been one of the many things we are sort of dealing with and trying to move forward with right now. So it's definitely something that's on my radar as director. We have appointments on almost all of our land use boards at the moment that need to be either reappointed or find members to fill vacancies. So it's definitely something we're looking at. I can't give you a definitive deadline on when those vacancies will be filled, but we're certainly working towards getting a full roster of those.
Thank you, Commissioner Gutierrez. We haven't heard from you all night. Where have you been?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been here listening to all this good stuff. Just a couple quick things, since Commissioner Faulkner brought up the possibility of Ty and you voting. I would just recommend, unless we're odd or that you would think about skipping the votes or filling this commission or throwing someone off. Anyway, just food for thought. The next thing, I sent an email to staff for a call because I had some questions and I never got a call back. Mr. Isaacson, if we can get phone numbers that we can text or just an updated list sent to us. Sometimes I'd like to call any of the planners instead of having to go through NOAA if I can. So I would appreciate that.
Absolutely. In the interim, until I get you that list, Commissioner Gutierrez, because of the remote working situation, I would just recommend email as a first opportunity to try to contact staff, even if it's just an email saying, hey, I'd like to schedule a time to talk. What's a good number to reach you? That's probably a more effective way of getting a hold of people in our current situation. But I'd be happy to share phone numbers with you as well.
Yeah, no, I did send an email out yesterday sometime before midday or anyway, sometime. I just had some questions, so they never got answered, but that's okay. I would just, I know we have some, it looks like a real full agenda coming up at the next meeting. And so I would just ask for contact numbers in case, so we can go directly to the planners because we know how strapped you guys are. We appreciate everything that you're doing. Thank you.
All right, I don't know that we need to go over next meeting, Noah, unless you think it's imperative. We've seen the agenda. We've heard you talk about it before. Anything that you need to tell us again?
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. I have discussed with some of the commissioners about the next agenda. I would say it's going to be a busy night. We're, probably a lot longer than tonight, but I'm actually 4 minutes. My estimate was 4 minutes from now, so I'm pretty close. But there's big things that are going to be on the next agenda, including fee increases for services that we provide in the land use department, and a controversial rezoning request and zoning ordinance amendment again. So I would, recommend that, you maybe do a little bit background, kind of see what our, as commissioners, you can go ahead and look at what our current fees are, what the services we deliver. That's public information. You can find it in our land use code, as well as on all our applications for the applications that come in front of you, and then all of our functions. So it would be good to look at that and kind of see how that hasn't changed since when Chair Hyatt was actually the director. That was the last time we changed the fees. So that's a huge amount of time that's passed, somewhat in the neighborhood of 12 years. There'll also be another text amendment, which will be minor compared to some of the other stuff we'll be dealing with that night. So I do expect a lot of public comment. I think there'll be a lot of questions raised. So that's what's going to be on the next agenda. And I expect it to be a long night, probably mostly because of the public comment. But that's pretty much all I have.
Noah, let me just ask you, have you talked to the other planners about the approve or deny language in their recommendations?
Chair Hyatt, commissioners, yes, I have. And I have brought that up, and we try to do the best we can when we're editing reports, but I happened to miss it in one of the reports you saw tonight. But the commission always has the option to not go with staff's recommendation. And that's why we give you sample motions, and it's approve or deny. And so one of the cases tonight, we missed saying deny. So, but it was meant to say you can approve or deny. That's up to the commission.
It's just optics, that's just what I'm concerned about. I don't want somebody from the outside reading that right up front in the report that says your job is to approve without considering that it could be to deny. We understand our job, but it's the public perception that I'm concerned about. So anyhow, I'll just leave that with you, but I'll raise that again if it happens. I just hope you can get everybody, unless there's somebody that disagrees. I mean, I think that's the
I agree.
good. I think that's the best language we can use. All right. Commissioner Garcia.
Yep, I apologize. My dog kids got out of hand there and I was unmuted, so.
Yeah, sure.
On the meeting for the 20th, I should be back, but depending on how things go, my daughter's going off to college in Flagstaff and her move-in date's on the 19th. We should be traveling back on the 20th, so I don't anticipate not being able to attend, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
I hope you have fast tires.
Fastest tires in the north.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Hogan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Noah, do we know what the dates for meetings in September are going to be?
Yes, Chair, Commissioners, Commissioner Hogan. I think we are going to have just the first meeting that I know of right now. I don't think we're going to have a second meeting that's planned right now. We always have a second meeting slot open that we reserve for a second meeting. I do anticipate 2 meetings in October. And looking forward, we're going to have more controversial cases, more big cases coming in front of you within the next few months. We're expecting probably 4 to 5 applications that are pretty big at this next August deadline. So I do anticipate that we'll be having in fact, we have one applicant who has asked to be in that second meeting in October because traffic studies have gotten more complicated now with COVID and schools being closed and when you're taking peak hour demands. So our traffic engineers spending a lot more time on these traffic studies from engineers and demanding a lot more data. So that's what.
Is that the 3rd of September preceding the Labor Day weekend? I believe so, right? We're not moving it until after Labor Day.
That's correct.
So it's September 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Burke, I just want to remind you that several of us have talked to you before about the possibility of using one of those vacant times to have something along the lines of a more policy-oriented meeting. And so I reiterate that if that's possible. And I know, listen, I know how hard it is for you. I mean, when the director says you're down 18% in budget, where else is it going to come but from staff? You know, so I understand where you guys are in this, but if you could plug and chug into one of our blank dates, some kind of policy meeting, that would be great from my point of view. I don't know how the other commissioners feel, but I'd like to encourage that.
And Chair and Commissioners, I did, that was my full intent when this happened. In fact, when we started doing these virtual meetings, I didn't actually think we were going to get busier than we were before, but we are getting busier and they're bigger cases and a lot of postponements have been happening and we get slowed down at governing body meetings because our next governing body meeting is going to be stacked full of land use case hearings. And I'm not making excuses, but my full intent was to actually start utilizing that second meeting that's scheduled to start providing the commission with policy and trainings from different departments and giving you guys different information where we could just have a conversation about, you know, traffic, for example, that's a big one, and traffic and MPO. We'd like to have both of them there. So I could look at a second meeting in September. I just don't want to overwhelm the commission with just 2 meetings every month. These are long meetings. They're never short. So I'm trying to be cognizant of the commission to when we slow down, but it doesn't look like we're going to slow down.
Thank you. And before we adjourn, I just don't want it to go to your head, Noah, but I want to thank you yesterday for calling me as I was coming back from vacation and my wife was in the car and you spent about 45 minutes explaining a variety of issues to me. And after you hung up, my wife said, gee, he's brilliant. And I said, no, you don't know him like I know him, you know.
Thank you. And thank you, Jackie. There's somewhere back there.
Yeah, she's out chasing the dog. But I tell you, you've got her vote anytime you need it.
Thank you.
All right, commissioners, if there's nothing else, no further business. Thank you, Melissa. And thank you, staff, and thank you, commissioners. And I
have
guess
a question, Jack.
Oh, yes, sir. Go ahead.
What district are we missing? I believe it's 4, is it not?
Well,
is it 2?
I think it's 2. And I think if you recall, we've talked about having Commissioner Clow be reappointed by Commissioner Michael in a counselor in District 2, thereby opening up an at-large appointment. Do you recall that?
That's exactly correct, Chair Hyatt. So that's the recommendation we've put forward, is to, because we've had issues finding commissioners out of District 2.
Right.
And Commissioner Clow resides in District 2, that we would reappoint her into the vacant District 2 and then open up a search for the at-large position, hoping that by being able to draw from the entire city, we could find a suitable applicant.
I'm sorry, was that you that asked that question? Who asked that question?
Dominic.
I asked that question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dominic. I thought it was.
I'm not familiar with the conversation about doing that. So
Oh, all right.
I just wanted to know because I wasn't sure if it was actually District 4, but I think Vice Chair Mark Hogan is District 4. Is that correct? Who's
District
4?
1.
No, I'm a 4. And I don't know. And I think, well, who else is a 4?
Who else is a 4?
Commissioner Satenga 4?
I'm a 4.
Oh, then you and I
There
are
you
the
go.
4s. You and I are
Oh,
4s.
we're the 2. Okay,
You're the-
I got you.
You and me,
All
bro.
right.
Yeah.
High five.
Hey.
This side, over here.
Boom. Up top.
Okay.
And Chair Hyatt, if I might also just put out, we do have a vacancy on our Capital Advisory Committee, the CIAC.
Yeah.
That does a lot of infrastructure kind of hearings, and you also are on that board as well, or that committee. And we do have a vacancy there. So if any of the commissioners are interested in that, please let Eli know so that we can get that in front of the mayor because we do want to fill that vacancy. And it's a very important board and a very important committee that doesn't get a lot of talk. And they come up with a major plan for infrastructure in the city, which includes intersection, parks, police, fire. So I would, if you're interested in that stuff, and it also ties into exactly what the commission is doing right now, which is approving development in areas. And sometimes we talk about, is the infrastructure there? What are the future traffic improvements? This would kind of cross that. So just want to let you know that we do have that vacancy. So
I'd be interested, Eli. I've done capital projects for most of my career, so I would be interested. I don't know if they'd be
Sign
interested. in
that
me.
angel up. Look at that. Look at what is that glow that comes? I mean, I'd like that too. How do I get
Okay, Jack, it's a trick my daughter taught me. It's the
Really?
kind of lighting you put on either side of your screen.
Really?
Really, you put yellow lighting on either side of your screen. That's it.
Send your daughter over here.
It's
Okay.
just like 2 lamps. It's easy. When we go back to real life, you might be like, Commissioner, why do you have 2 lamps on the podium with you? I'd be like, it looks better. I don't know.
We're never going back to real life. All right, commissioners, I hear nothing else, so let's adjourn. Thank you very much. Good night. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks,
Thank
Jack.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Night, everyone.
Bye.